Popular Woodworking senior editor Robert W. Lang visits Frank Miller Lumber in Union City, Indiana, where he discusses lumber and how to purchase stock for your projects.
One of my favorite things about a place like this is they've got a lot of unusual woods that you don't see every day. Because they're milling it here, they can pull off the oddball stuff and set it aside. And they've got some really neat things here. Here's some spalted maple, where the wood has actually started to decay in the log. Here's some white oak with little bits of bark inclusion. Here's some curly quartered and rift white oak and some curly maple. They also have a lot of exotic woods. Here's zebra wood, some yellow heart. Here's bubinga, which really has some nice figure to it. Some European beech. And this dark wood is wingy. In addition to the fancier woods up front, back here in the warehouse, they've got poplar, maple, oak, plain slice, the more common woods that you use every day. The boards are all random widths. You don't walk in and say, give me a curly red oak 1x6. They'll either laugh at you in your face or they'll wait till you leave and make fun of you. But this is the way you get the best yield of the hardwood. It's the way it comes off the tree and it's the way it's bought and sold. So basically, because it's random width, you're buying by the board foot. Now, a board foot is a measure of volume. It's an inch thick, 12 inches wide, and 12 inches long. Now, this board here is about 5 board feet. You can see it's about 10 feet long, it's about 6 inches wide, and it started an inch thick. It's been surfaced on 2 sides, so it's a little thinner, but it's sold by the rough thickness. This board is also 5 board feet. It's wider and it's shorter, but the volume works out the same. So these have all been marked off. Somebody has gone through and calculated how many board feet are in each board. You can also purchase hardwoods just calling up the mill or the dealer and saying, send me 100 board feet, send me 200 board feet. And what they'll do is they'll go through the stack and just pull it off the stack. If you come in and pick things out individually, you can get a little better yield. You can pick boards for a specific part of your project, but it's going to cost you a little more. If you buy the whole stack, you're taking what they sent.
Bob caught up with outlet store manager Josh Brennan, who answers questions and explained quarter-sawn lumber, Frank Miller Lumber's best-known product.
So when you order in bulk, this is what you get. How big a pile is this, Josh?
This is about 240 board feet of poplar here.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about was lumber grades. I think that gets confusing to a lot of people. What are the differences between what you sell?
Sure. We typically call what we put in our bins here, we typically call our upper grade good. It makes it a little easier selecting better or facing better, are the top grades depending on what species you're talking about. So it's easy to say this is good, this is our top grade. Mm-hmm. You're going to yield at least 83 1/3% clear cuttings. As you can see, this red oak board here, has very few defects. And next to here, this is a 1 common grade. 1 common's a step down in grade. Obviously, you've got some issues here in the middle, but for people that are cutting small parts or cutting cabinet parts, a lot of times 1 common is the way to go. It's a lot less expensive. You've got lots of clear cuttings in here.
Yeah, if you're building a piece of furniture, a lot of your parts, that can be a nice wide stile on a piece. This can be a drawer front. Right there can be a panel. There's a lot of usable lumber in the 1 common.
Yeah. But typically on the molding and that kind of thing, they're always going to go with the upper grade material. If you need long runs, you're obviously not going to get an 8-foot nice clear piece out of the 1 common.
What's the difference in price between the two generally?
Oh, typically in the red oak, for instance, it's about 50 cents a board foot less for the 1 common. So, economically speaking, it is quite a bit less expensive if you can cut the small parts.
Yeah, if you're thrifty and you know you're going to
Sure.
be cutting it up anyway, why spend the extra for the big clear board?
Yep.
Josh, one of the things Frank Miller Lumber is known for is quarter-sawn white oak. Can you explain what the process is to get quarter-sawn lumber and how that differs from plain sawn?
Sure. Yeah, a typical plain sawn mill is going to take that round log and square it up into a big cant. And they would take a board off the side and flip it, take a board off and flip it, and work down to where they have a cant in the middle that typically goes to pallet use. And when you do that, you're going to have your cathedral grain pattern that you're used to seeing. You're used to seeing in your any typical oak. You go to a major retailer and they're selling oak. It's typically plain sawn lumber. So it's going to have this cathedral grain pattern. In the quarter sawn process, we're going to take that log and we're going to cut it in half. And then we're going to take that half off and we'll drop that down. You're going to cut that into quarters. And you're sending the quarters over to a resaw where that quarter is going to go through a resaw. And this would be the first board that comes off of that quarter. And if you look at the annual rings on the end of that board, they're going to be 90 degrees to the face. That is where your quarter sawn lumber is coming from. You're going to have that medullary ray pattern that you'll see in the quarter sawn lumber. This board leaned up here is a good representation of a quarter sawn board. With that real straight grain pattern, we got medullary ray across the face. But in that quarter sawn process, this cant will come around a carousel end for end and be flipped up, and the next board that would come off would be this one. There again, 90 degrees to the face, straight grain, medullary ray pattern. And as we continue to work that down, we would just keep working through that. And as you work your way into that log, you'll start seeing less medullary ray. You'll have a straight grain pattern. You'll have very little medullary ray. And these are typically the second cuts on those could very well be quartered boards as well. And this is a smaller log here, so it's showing more of a rift pattern, and that's what we call these boards, where the annual rings are more of a 45-degree angle of the face. Just going to be real straight grain, not have much medullary ray, and just be like I say, a straight grain pattern. And then typically you get down to this piece where they'll cut it down as much as they can get out of it, and this will be chipped. Typically the chips are used. We chip it up. It'll be sold to a paper company, and it'll turn it into paper.
I think everybody knows that trees have that annual ring structure. You keep mentioning the medullary rays, and that's what gives the quarter sawn oak the figure. But where do those rays occur in the tree, Josh?
Those rays are going to start from the center of that log. It's kind of difficult to see, but you can follow them. There's a little saw curve involved here with the way this is put back together, but you can see them coming out from the center of that log and following their way out here. And as you can also see in that process, that as your rings move around this direction, I mean, here's your 90 degrees and here's more of your 45 degrees. You watch as the angle of that medullary ray changes as you work your way into that log.
So it's how that medullary ray is sliced as the face of the board is cut that makes a difference in the figure.
Correct.
And white oak, you're going to see it more than in some other species. It's
Correct.
quartered.
Yeah, in the white oak and the red oak, you will always see, in the quartered boards, you'll always see a medullary ray pattern. In other species such as hard maple, walnut, ash, cherry, there's not a discernible ray flake pattern. That medullary ray is still there, just the way it represents itself in the board is going to be different. It's just going to be a straight grain pattern. You're not going to see this big flake that you see in the white oak or the red oak.
All right. Because we're at the mill, they've got plenty of material on hand. As you can see, just stacks and stacks and stacks. They're not going to run out.
The one common